Hey everybody, this is Minion Soldier, and this is the Piracy Show. Now, we've done a few videos recently talking about a lot of the complications and a lot of the gripes that we have with certain ships, a lot of the concerns that we have. And, you know, for someone who's just found this channel, as some of you have, you might think that this video is, these videos come from a channel that is mainly about, kind of grinding on CIG and just kind of like saying, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong, blah, blah, blah. And you might start to think that I have a certain temperament where I'm like one of these guys who's just like, well, Star Citizen, they're one bad month away from closing their doors and all that sort of stuff. That I'm one of those types of people. And the truth of it is that I am not remotely. There are certain people out there in the community who will know very much what I'm talking about. The only time that I've ever really been deeply concerned about my quote-unquote investment in Star Citizen was around 2015, and that was when the Lando leaks happened, and all of a sudden we went from an environment where it was mostly we were just being shown very, very limited, very, very select things, to an environment where, thanks to Disco Lando, Jared leaking certain things out unintentionally, that we saw the work that was going on in the background. And contrary to the beliefs of, I'm sure, some at CIG, this did nothing to reduce the surprise or reduce the magnitude of the things that were revealed to us. What it did do, though, is it really kind of curbed a lot of community angst and anxiety as to the true state of the project. Because you have to remember that up until that point, all we really had was a very limited version of Arena Commander and a whole bunch of screenshots and vague promises as to when many of our ships were going to arrive. Now, of course, some of those ships have still yet to arrive, and there are many little things that we can kind of point at and say, this was done wrong, that was done wrong, just like any ship. This elevator shouldn't have been here, it should have been a staircase, rawr. And it's true. It's true, but broadly speaking, why am I not upset? Why am I not angry? I deal with that elevator on an almost daily basis. Well, a little less than daily now that Cyberpunk's out, but we'll get to that in a minute. But broadly speaking, when you look at this ship as a whole, that elevator, it's a concern, but it's not a game. It's not a deal-breaking concern, and a lot of these concerns that we talk about in Star Citizen, a lot of the things that we look at and we say, the game developers should have seen this problem coming, and people in the community saw it coming and made videos about this and talked about this on the forums years ago, and nothing was done, and here we are 2020 and it's still not fixed. There's a lot of little things like that we can kind of pick up on and we can have conversations about, and I don't think that these conversations are negative. I think that these conversations highlight some of the issues that CIG has and some of the things that they have to kind of resolve internally in a way that will help out their productivity, because there's less having to go back and having to redesign things again and again and again, as they have done with the Gladius and as they have done with other ships. And they keep realizing, oh yeah, we should have taken that into account. Oh yeah, we should have taken this into account. And oftentimes the roots, the roots of those problems were described by the community in epic detail in many forum posts and YouTube videos and Twitter tweets, whatever. People have, explained these things to CIG, and they've just kind of fallen on deaf ears. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh no, actually it is an issue. We didn't realize that. But given all these things, given all these little problems and concerns I come up with, why am I not, deeply concerned? Why am I not sitting there and saying, oh, come on, guys, stop being whales. CIG is one bad month away from shutting their doors, and this is all over, you just don't realize it yet. Ha ha ha. Why am I not like one of those types of folks when I am somebody who innately finds a lot of issues and finds a lot of problems? And the reason being is, to a certain degree, it's kind of what you're looking at right here and right now. Now, there are many space games out there. there's a whole lot of space games out there, from various eras if you want to kind of go back in time. And there are current ones like EVE Online, Elite Dangerous, but nobody does it to this scale, to this level of detail. Elite and EVE Online certainly have their cachet, their niche, but their appeal is lessened by their scale, because you can't really get down into a ship on a granular level and have those kind of Star Wars-y adventures that you kind of want to have. You kind of want to be a little bit first person. Yeah, you do want to have the ability to fly around in a spaceship and have epic space battles and have a really deep and meaningful combat system, rather than something that's kind of like the fighter combat was in the Old Republic. You want to have something much more like a real experience, or as close to real as you can get in a video game. And that kind of first-person experience is something that is fairly unique. Now, Elite is making moves to try and, kind of close that gap. EVE Online, I think at one point that was on the docket. That was something that they were looking at, but they ultimately abandoned. Please correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below. I haven't played EVE Online since Red Moon Rising, so my information is obviously out of date, but if there is further motion on that area, please put it in the comments. I'd love to hear about it. But apart from that, this level of detail just simply doesn't exist in other games. And when you think about games like Cyberpunk, or you think about games, like World of Warcraft or things like this, a lot of those games really represent what is the old generation or the dying generation of video games. And you might think, well, Cyberpunk just came out. Yeah, it was a little delayed, but Cyberpunk just came out. How could Cyberpunk be considered the old generation? Or how could you look at Cyberpunk in any way and say it's dated? But it is. When you look at the world that you inhabit in Cyberpunk, and trust me, I've been spending a criminal amount of time playing that game. It is very enjoyable, and maybe one day I'll make a video about that. But one of the impressions that I couldn't shake when I was playing the game is that when I was driving around and I was using third-person view to navigate my car a little bit more easily through the streets, I couldn't help but feel that I was playing like a futuristic GTA in certain respects. Now, there are broad differences between the two games, but at that one point, they do coincide with one another. And I was looking around the world, and the world was visually very impressive, but at the same time, the scale of it, I have to admit, I found to be rather unambitious. And I looked at it, and I was like, oh, okay. So, I mean, there's a lot of great things there. And please don't take this as me kind of lambasting, Cyberpunk. 'Cause I think Cyberpunk is a fantastic game, but the scale of the world I felt was a little on the cute side. And that's the same problem that World of Warcraft has, and a lot of MMOs in general have, even upcoming ones like Ashes of Creation, is that their worlds are tiny. Their worlds are small. Now the creators and the artists can make a lot of certain changes, like you always have to turn around a bend, or you always have to have a wall or a cliff blocking your view to a certain area to kind of give the world its sense of immensity, to hide the actual scale of the world that they're building. There's a lot of little tricks that they use to conveniently disguise these things. Star Citizen, when you're walking around inside of a city like Lorville, they do a little bit of that too, to kind of make the city look bigger than it actually is. When you think about the scale of Lorville as a town and how much of that is actual playable area that you can walk through, it's not all that big, right? It's a fairly big town, but the playable area is not all that big. Now, when you look at what I'm doing right now, I'm landing on the surface of a deeply detailed and vast moon around the planet of Crusader, Daymar specifically. Now, a lot of this is empty space. a lot of this is, kind of like a dried up dead wasteland. So you'd think, well, all for naught, right? You've done all this detail, you've done all this work, but ultimately a lot of it goes wasted. But the truth of it is that players can eventually build homesteads here. Players are going to populate places like Daymar, places like Yella, places like Chelon with all their own they're going to create their own content, their own homes, their own landing pads, their own businesses, things like that. These are the things that are supposed to come into Star Citizen. And no one else is trying to build a world on this scale at this level of detail. No one else has this. And so when I look at Star Citizen, I do see a lot of the issues. I do see a lot of the bugs, don't get me wrong. But at the same time, I think I see something that maybe kind of has just kind of gone over people's heads and they don't really understand, is that when you look at Star Citizen, you say, oh, Chris is doing this wrong, Chris is doing that wrong. One of the things that Chris got right was the building of the moons and the planets at this level of detail. The moment when CIG said, we're not just going to do landing sites and surrounding areas on planets, but when they came up with the idea that, oh yes, I believe it was out of the Frankfurt office. I can't remember the game developer who did it, but it was one of the guys at the Frankfurt office was able to procedurally generate a planet. And that became from pupil to planet, that video that we saw. And that changed a lot of people's minds about what was going on in Star Citizen. But I still think that what a lot of people didn't realize is what CIG had developed was they had developed a way to kind of simulate a planet at a first-person level of detail that no one else had done before. Now you can look at the Stanton system and all the planets and all the moons, and you can say, yeah, there's a lot of bugs, there's a lot of lag. But if we scaled that down to just Daymar, if we scaled the entirety of the solar system in Star Citizen just to Daymar, we ran only Daymar, how much more stable would the servers be? How much more reliable would the game be, right? Think about that for a moment. The game would probably be infinitely much smoother to play, easier on the servers, easier on the player clients. And that's what I think a lot of people don't realize is the gold mine. Even I think CIG doesn't fully appreciate or realize the gold mine that they're sitting on with what they've already developed. I mean, look outside the window here right now. I'm sure some of you have heard that there was that Funcom is doing a survival version of Dune. That is something that they're working on in the background. Well, how much better of an environment could you build than this for a Dune game? Imagine being able to have the entire planet of Arrakis at your fingertips. Well, guess what? CIG has already done it. They have the know-how, they have the technology, they have built this. And I bet you if you were to just do one planet, it would be infinitely more reliable than the current persistent universe is. Now, I mean, really sit down and think about it, because you could say the same thing about a game like World of Warcraft, and there would be obvious benefits there as well. But when you think about survival games like, let's say, Conan or Ark or something like that, you're always limited to a little island. It's like you found yourself on an island, or you found yourself in a certain cut off little area, and you have to do everything within these zones. Now, some of them are broader than others. Certainly Conan, the first area that they opened up in, Conan Exiles, was fairly cool. And then they added on to it later, and then they added another island even after that, but they're not connected, those two zones. There's a lot of really cool things going on with those games when you can do things at that first person level of detail. But their worlds are so small and unambitious. It's one of the biggest problems with World of Tanks, is that visually World of Tanks looks great, but the scale is horrific. I mean, the battlegrounds are tiny, and it's kind of like it's a showcase of what the game could be, but what the game will never be, because they don't want to spend money on actually developing, the worlds that they need to develop. Well, guess what? CIG has already done it. And this is why when people kind of go like, oh, they're a month away from falling apart, I don't really believe that that's true. I think that CIG's kind of biggest goof that they make is that the fact that they're not out there marketing this technology to other game developers and saying, you know, hey, Funcom, we heard you're making Dune. What if I told you we can give you the entire planet of Arrakis at the level of detail that you did, areas in Conan Exiles with? But we can offer you an infinitely playable zone. Think about that from a player perspective yourself. Let's say in this Dune game, you make a Fremen warrior and you progress all the way up to a Fade Keen, and you have to do survival skills out there in the deserts of Arrakis. Imagine how much better that game would be if you had the infinite horizons that, for all intents and purposes, a planet like that would be. Think about all the things that you could explore, all the things that you can do, all the places that you can travel. Imagine playing that with other players. That would be immensely fun. That would be such a great game to see the sunset and the sunrise, and to know that over the horizon isn't just an invisible wall that stops you from traveling, but it's just yet another horizon. If I were CIG, I'd be out there marketing my ass off, not to the players in terms of ships, but to other game companies and saying, hey, look what we have, and think about the games that you're developing and what you can do with them. I mean, the ability for, let's say, Blizzard to turn around and say, you know what, we're going to stop doing this thing where, it's like, here's a new continent that mysteriously no one has seen up until this point, but it's just a few islands. Enjoy. What if they could actually build the entire planet of Azeroth? Recently in the BFA expansion, one of the big story points was, the Kultiran and the Zandalari navies kind of going head to head as the Horde and the Alliance were jockeying for power, over the planet. And one of the things I thought was really kind of dumb about it was that, we didn't really have a place where we could really kind of showcase that conflict, because everything is just islands in a sea that's trapped within certain boundaries. So we weren't actually able to live out that conflict. There was all this promise with this conflict, but it never really emerged because we didn't really have the world. And Blizzard does things at a certain time scale and a certain schedule. They don't really spend a lot of time on R&D. If you really think about it, a lot of the expansions that we've gotten since Burning Crusade and onwards have really been, technically, in terms of changing how the world works, it have been rather unambitious compared to the scale of the original world that they delivered in our classic or vanilla World of Warcraft. So they really haven't gone anywhere really important, and I think they've kind of lost their way in that. But imagine if you could all of a sudden turn around and with the next expansion actually give them the entire planet and say, here, now you can get on a ship and you can sail your ship from coast to coast. You can actually you can immerse yourself much more fully into that world. Imagine what you could build. You talk about the limitations of the zones, and that's they're actually being so small in that game, and they are, that there's really no room for player housing in a game. But what if you built the entire world? How much room would there be then for player housing? CIG has built the solution to many of these problems, but nobody's really picking up on it. When I looked at Ashes of Creation recently, because that game was getting a lot of hype, I was very impressed with what the game developer said, or what the head guy said. His name escapes me. I believe it's Steve something, but I don't really do these shows with notes if that's not entirely obvious yet. But he's kind of funding a lot of that game's development out of pocket, and there was a lot of cool things that he talked about. But at the same time, I couldn't help but kind of look at the world design and say, kind of unambitious and not impressed, because I've seen entire worlds outside of my window and known that I can walk around on the surface of any of those worlds. I could, if it wasn't for the limitations of my armor or food and water, I could circumnavigate one of these planets on foot. It would take forever to do, But I could do that, and everywhere would be different from, the last place. Nothing would be quite the same. And you think about what you could do with that in terms of a game. Imagine Cyberpunk 2077, but instead of just being, Night City, you could have Atlanta, you could have New York, you could have Neo Tokyo, which is always about to explode. Some people will get that reference. You could have all kinds of different cities, and you could travel to them, and you could watch that travel happen. You could actually experience that full world there. And that's, when people panic and they say, like, oh my God, CIG, they're a month away. It's no, they have something right now that I don't even really think they fully grasp what they've done. And there's a lot of game developers who are going to be, hey, how did you do that? And can we license that? I really honestly believe that is something that is coming. The truth of it is that if you're trying to get into the MMO market or the survival game market, and you're thinking on the scale of the next Ark or the next Atlas or the next, Conan Exiles or the next World of Warcraft or something like that, and you're not looking at what CIG is doing here, you're thinking in the Stone Age. You're dating yourself and you're trapping yourself before you even start your project. If someone came to me and said right now, what would you do to fix one of these games? I would say immediately I would walk in, I would say, halt all production on future projects, get in touch with Chris Roberts at CIG, get that world technology that he's built, figure it out, adapt it to what we're trying to do, because we have to be much more ambitious, and we have to take the next leap. And to be perfectly frank, anyone who's out there developing one of these games who isn't looking at this and saying this is the way it's going to be in the future, so I need to get ahead of the game and do this, is a dinosaur, and their thinking is antiquated, and they're going to just become something of a curiosity. Think about it this way. This is the analogy that I would use to best describe the mentality of game development right now. Is we're in the late 1800s and everyone's buying, trading, and selling horses, right? Everyone's buying and trading and selling horses, and that's their business. It's a known business. It has known values, known quantities. Everyone kind of understands it. So it's the way that everyone's used to dealing with the world and seeing the world. But now all of a sudden this guy comes along and he's got this clunky contraption that rolls down the road, and it's loud, and it makes all these popping and banging noises as it goes down the road, and it's called the automobile. And everyone's like, oh, that crazy thing, that's probably just going to die and disappear. That's finished. No one's going to want one of those mechanical complex contraptions. No one's going to want to deal with that. But no one really realized back then how the world was about to change. Sometimes when you go and you look at some of the very old homes in some of the areas where you may live, some of the larger, older homes, you might realize that a certain house in the back used to be the stable. That's where they used to keep the horses. It's now the garage. The world changed right out from under these people, and they never really saw it coming. But it was there. Like, all the evidence was there. They just didn't have that benefit of foresight to say, oh my God, this is going to change the world. And I think that that's kind of what's happening with Star Citizen right now, is a lot of people are kind of stuck in that horse trading mentality, and they haven't figured out that the car is here. And yes, it's unreliable. Yes, it's a little bit clunky. And yes, it's buggy, but it's about to get a lot better. And the world, all these people that are out there trading horses and trying to find newfangled ways to sell the same old horse to people aren't really realizing that, they're spending millions of dollars working in yesterday's world, in a world that is largely not going to exist anymore, because the next gen of games and the next step for many of the games that already exist that persist because they're online universes that people like to escape to, like your World of Warcrafts or, the Old Republics or your Cyberpunks and whatnot. a lot of these worlds are probably going to have to adapt to this system in the future. And that's, I think, like the low-key kind of gold mine that Star Citizen has going on, is no one's been able to do it at this scale with this level of detail. And, you know, Star Citizen is being much more ambitious, and they're trying to make multiple planets and multiple moons. But for most of these, you know, games that already exist, just one of these moons would be more than enough for the world that they want to build and the stories that they want to tell. And even taking that one little bit, this one moon, and putting it in, you know, adapting it to their game universe would ultimately change the game overnight for the rest of the MMO industry. And that's what CIG is sitting on and maybe doesn't fully realize. And I think it's also what the gaming industry doesn't fully appreciate, is the fact that the world has changed. And it's a race to see who figures it out first.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.